when it was given that people were not being answered on the call line when they came in, which has been talked about many times in the press by others. That is not true. I'll acknowledge the fact that we brought back staff to help in those situations, and that's why they're now exempted. Sometimes, and we did do that.
What began as questions about veterans' health care quickly turned into a blistering confrontation. Senator Tammy Duckworth accused Veterans Affairs Secretary Doug Collins of creating unnecessary chaos by firing critical VA employees, arguing that veterans are now facing delays in benefits, mental health care, and crisis services. Collins insisted the administration fixed its mistakes, but Duckworth wasn't buying it. Here's what happened.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do think it's important to acknowledge that we did sign up, just in the first year of the PACT Act alone, 1 million veterans. So that increase in personnel is also to deal with the increase in veterans coming to VA for care, long overdue for their acts because of their exposure to toxic substances.
Yeah, we also lost about 400,000 veterans that year as well. So yeah, it does equal out a little bit.
But we had well over 1 million in the first year signed up. Secretary Collins, when you testified before this committee in January, you stated that it would be a mark of failure, your words, mark of failure, if a veteran must contact the congressional office for support with accessing their VA care and benefits. My office alone has received 143 casework requests from veterans since the start of the Trump administration, a consequence of service disruptions worsened by DOJ's cruel dismantlement of the VA workforce and of the critical programs serving our nation's heroes. I'm going to give you some examples. A Vietnam veteran did not receive his benefits for 3 months due to greater than usual processing times. A veteran in urgent need of mental health services was told that the earliest available appointment was 6 weeks away. A veteran's widow and cancer survivor had her CHAMP VA covered prescription canceled without notice, forcing her to pay $700 out of pocket. An Iraq War veteran needed his records to apply for his disability benefits, but was met with a 6 to 12-month backlog. Now, backlogs and delays are not new to VA. They were there when I was at the VA under Secretary Shinseki in the Obama administration. And so I think, I would agree that this is indeed a mark of failure, and I'm requesting your commitment to work together to overcome this backlog. This will require the immediate reinstatement of all 2,400 VA employees who were indiscriminately terminated when Elon Musk and his Doge cronies failed to evaluate civil servants on the basis of merit and failed to use a scalpel to root out the bad apples who are failing to effectively execute the mission, and instead chose the most wasteful, inefficient, and lazy path in simply firing probationary employees en masse, which ironically represent some of our nation's most motivated, most idealistic, and most energized federal employees, those probationary employees who signed up since the PACT Act was passed, for example. Those Americans, including thousands upon thousands of veterans who made the patriotic decision to serve their country and begin their civilian careers. Secretary Collins, will you commit to reviewing the status of all terminated VA employees and promptly reinstating them and to protecting the VA workforce against additional indiscriminate mass firings?
Well, most of the ones that I've already testified earlier, the probationers were brought back to work in that setup, so they're already back at work. And we're going to keep looking at our setup and how we do it, because nothing we've done so far. We protected over 300,000 plus positions that were not, they protected those that were directed with disability care and with health care benefits. I just have a question, and I appreciate your concern, because I do still think when they have to call your offices, it's a failure for us. I say that to all of our hospitals, and I say it to all of our veterans benefits. I have a curious question here. You brought up something that's very close to my heart. Was that veteran who was given 6 weeks for an appointment, were they given a community care option?
We could get you that information, but if you
I would love to know, because I want to help
that.
I want to help if we can.
With all with all my open cases, I would love to work with you.
Is that also and also, again, I've acknowledged this from day one. You and I've talked about this. The calls to our VA represent something we're not doing right. And I think that should overlay everything we're talking about here, is why is this a problem? Why are we still there? Records that take 6 to 12 months, that's possibly, I'm assuming that's probably a DOD issue, trying to get the records out of the DOD. These are all issues that I want to try and fix.
There have been access with VA records as well.
I agree.
Let me just go on to the next thing. In an official letter, response to Senator Tammy Baldwin's oversight letter on the Veterans Crisis Line, dated April 7th, 2025, you wrote, and I quote, "While 24 VCL employees erroneously received probationary termination notices, all notices were rescinded. All terminated employees were reinstated and have been rehired into the same positions they previously held." end quote. Secretary Collins, while I appreciate your candor in finally acknowledging that in fact VCL employees were terminated and clarifying that this was incompetence and not malicious intent, I hope you recognize that your work in fixing this mistake is not complete. Personally, I know of at least one veteran who you still have failed to reinstate, and this was a person who did so well that they were promoted to help train other VCL hotline employees, the type of person who's a supervisor on a shift. They still have not been reinstated. Look, the Veterans Crisis Line serves veterans in their darkest hour, and it is our responsibility to make certain that it operates to the highest standards. Just as every military commander understands that our warfighters' effectiveness, indeed their lethality, depends on a fully resourced, diverse network of enablers possessing the capability and capacity to support a given mission's requirements, you can't just invest and rehire the pilots of the aircraft and not retain the refuelers and the mechanics who fix that aircraft. Secretary Collins, do you agree that support staff who train, equip, and handle the basic operational and administrative functions of the Veterans Crisis Line program are mission critical?
That's why we brought them back, Senator. And I think there's something, though, that we need to also clarify here, and this was clarified not by our senior level, it was clarified by career employees, that no VCL who answers the phone, who talked to our veterans, was let go.
Right, but it's the VCL can't operate without the other people as well, like the supervisors on shift or the people who train the VCL. You are parsing your words, and there are Veterans Crisis Line people who have been fired, who have not been reinstated, and these are people who actually are training the people who are answering the phones. These are people who did so well as a phone answerer that they are the supervisors of the people, and you can't, like I said, you can't just say, okay, we're going to take care of the pilots, but not the refuelers and the mechanics who maintain that jet.
And I think we can actually find common ground agreement here that that was why they were brought back, but also I will not accept the premise when it was given that people were not being answered on the call line when they came in, which has been talked about many times in the press by others. That is not true. I'll acknowledge the fact that we brought back staff to help in those situations, and that's why they're now exempted. Sometimes, and we did do that, but I will not also let it be put out there that people were not getting their phone calls answered because those were the ones that were let go. Those were not the ones that were let go, and I think we at least need to be honest about the situation. As far as I agree with you, that's why they brought them back. And if you have a situation with one person, please let me know, let my office find out, and we'll talk about it.
There are more than one person being affected.
Thank you.
Senator Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Secretary. Thank you for your testimony today. We all want to take care of our veterans.
One of the most consequential exchanges during the hearing came when Senator Tammy Duckworth challenged Veterans Affairs Secretary Doug Collins over whether staffing decisions inside the Department of Veterans Affairs have made it harder for veterans to receive the care and benefits they earned through military service. Duckworth began by reminding the committee that the passage of the PACT Act dramatically expanded eligibility for VA healthcare and benefits by recognizing illnesses linked to toxic military exposures. That law opened the door for more than 1 million additional veterans to seek treatment, meaning the VA has had to serve a significantly larger population than in previous years. Her argument was straightforward. When demand for services increases, maintaining an experienced workforce becomes even more important. To illustrate her concerns, Duckworth cited several cases her office had handled. She described a Vietnam veteran whose disability benefits were delayed for months, another veteran waiting weeks for urgently needed mental health care, a widow unexpectedly forced to pay hundreds of dollars for medication after prescription coverage was interrupted, and an Iraq War veteran facing months-long delays in obtaining records needed to pursue disability compensation. These examples served a larger purpose. Duckworth argued they reflected systemic pressures inside the VA rather than isolated administrative mistakes. Importantly, Duckworth acknowledged that backlogs existed before the current administration. She noted that similar problems were present during her own time working at the Department of Veterans Affairs under the Obama administration. By making that point, she framed the issue as a long-standing challenge while arguing that recent staffing reductions had made those existing problems even harder to solve. Her sharpest criticism focused on the dismissal of probationary employees during the federal workforce reductions associated with the administration's broader restructuring efforts. Duckworth argued that many of those employees were among the newest, most motivated public servants hired specifically to help implement expanded veterans benefits following passage of the PACT Act. In her view, eliminating those workers without carefully evaluating individual positions weakened the agency's ability to meet growing demand. Secretary Collins rejected the suggestion that veterans' healthcare positions had been broadly compromised. He responded that many probationary employees had already been brought back and emphasized that the department had protected hundreds of thousands of positions directly involved in healthcare and veterans' benefits. One notable moment came when Collins repeated something he has said before: whenever a veteran has to contact a congressional office just to obtain routine VA services, he considers that a failure by the department. Rather than dismissing Duckworth's examples, he acknowledged that those situations indicate the system still has work to do. The conversation then shifted to one of the VA's most sensitive responsibilities, the Veterans Crisis Line. The Veterans Crisis Line is a 24-hour suicide prevention service that connects veterans in emotional distress with trained responders. Because suicide prevention remains one of the VA's highest priorities, any staffing changes affecting the program receive intense scrutiny from lawmakers. Duckworth argued that although Collins had previously acknowledged mistaken termination notices affecting crisis line employees, some experienced supervisory staff still had not been reinstated. She stressed that answering crisis calls depends on far more than the people who answer the phones. Supervisors, trainers, and operational support staff all play essential roles in maintaining a system capable of responding quickly and effectively during life-threatening emergencies. To make that point understandable, Duckworth used a military analogy. She said an air force cannot succeed by keeping only the pilots while dismissing the mechanics and refueling crews that make every mission possible. In the same way, she argued, the Veterans Crisis Line cannot function effectively if only frontline operators are protected while experienced support personnel disappear. Collins pushed back on one specific claim. He maintained that veterans calling the crisis line continued to have their calls answered and argued that reports suggesting otherwise created an inaccurate public impression. He acknowledged that some support staff had been restored but insisted the department never stopped providing crisis response to veterans in need. Although the two lawmakers disagreed over the scale of the problem, the exchange highlighted a broader issue facing the Department of Veterans Affairs. Managing one of the nation's largest healthcare systems requires balancing budget decisions, staffing levels, and expanding eligibility while ensuring that veterans do not experience interruptions in critical services. For many veterans, delays in disability compensation, medical appointments, or crisis intervention are not simply administrative inconveniences. They directly affect financial stability, physical health, and mental well-being. That is why congressional oversight of the VA often becomes so intense regardless of which political party controls the administration. Ultimately, this hearing was about more than individual personnel decisions. It reflected an ongoing debate over whether the VA can successfully modernize its workforce while continuing to provide timely care to millions of veterans who depend on the department every day. If you found this breakdown helpful and want clear, fact-based explanations of the biggest moments from congressional hearings without watching hours of testimony yourself, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Floor Report, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next breakdown.